Ewan Lenahan apparently used to be some kind of like troll on Twitter. I don't know much about it, but he was recently suspended, and it may have something to do with that. But we have this story published in Quillette, apparently having to do with his research on Antifa and their connection to journalists. So I did cover this story before, but because he did a proper write-up, I wanted to go through it and talk about this again, with always starting with a big caveat. I recommend taking these with a grain of salt, these kind of stories, because you've got like the crime web thing going on, all these different names connected to other names, and they did the same thing to me and other people, you know, like Dave Rubin, where they tried connecting us all on these dots. And I'll stress that part of what they did in mapping social interactions doesn't necessarily imply positive or negative interactions. With that caveat being said, take it all with a grain of salt. We're going to read through this because I can speak some of this, and yes, many people actually are Antifa activists and far left fringe extremists working at these media companies. So this is a story from Quillette. It's not your imagination. The journalists writing about Antifa are often their cheerleaders. But before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you want to support my work. There are multiple donation options you can choose from. Of course, just liking and commenting is one of the best things you can do. The engagement is really, really good. Subscribe if you haven't already. But let's read the story. Ewan writes, on February 1st, 2017, Milo Yiannopoulos was scheduled to give a talk about free speech at the University of California, Berkeley. But he was prevented from speaking by a group of 150 or so masked black-clad members of a then-obscure movement calling itself Antifa. The protesters caused $100,000 worth of damage to the campus and injured 6 people as they threw rocks and Molotov cocktails. 9 months later, again at Berkeley, an anti-Marxist rally descended into violence as approximately 100 masked Antifa members harassed journalists and beat rally organizers and attendees. Berkeley was where Antifa rose to national attention, but it hasn't been the only place where the group has engaged in sustained acts of violence. At a Washington, D.C. Unite the Right rally in August 2018, Antifa members hurled objects at police and assaulted journalists. In Portland, Oregon, violent street clashes involving Antifa have become regular events, notwithstanding claims that Antifa is a peaceful, anti-fascist community defense group. It has adopted tactics that often are more violent than those of the right-wing movements that the group opposes. Now, I want to stress, because most of you probably already know this, we've got a video here of Andy Ngo getting pepper sprayed. It's not so much that they are violent, it's that they're delusional, and I mean this, I don't mean this to be a dick or to be disrespectful. They literally believe they're fighting like, fringe far-right. They really believe that run-of-the-mill Trump supporters and regular Americans are the fringe far-right extremists. Sometimes they do, right? And you often see their cheerleaders in media saying they use, these direct conflict to challenge fringe far-right groups. Sometimes. Unfortunately, the issue that I want to make sure is highlighted is when they target innocent regular people and accuse them of being, Nazi, if you get what I'm saying. So it's actually that they're kind of they're delusional, right? They're out of they don't see the world correctly. Their view of the world is skewed to such an extreme degree. They think they literally are the revolution fighting against the empire and stormtroopers. They're quite literally out of their minds. He writes, Antifa often receives media coverage that is neutral or even favorable, with its members' violence either being ignored by reporters or vaguely explained away as a product of right-wing provocation. What's more, anecdotal evidence has suggested that many of the mainstream reporters who are most active in covering Antifa also tend to enthusiastically amplify their claims, especially at The Guardian. In October 2018, my research partner and I decided to investigate the truth of this impression by using a mix of network mapping and linguistic analysis to see which prominent journalists who covered Antifa also were closely connected to leading Antifa figures on social media. We then inspected the Antifa-related stories these journalists had written. We created a data set of 58,254 Antifa or Antifa-associated Twitter accounts based on the follows of 16 verified Antifa seed accounts. Using a software tool that analyzed the number and nature of connections associated with each individual account, we winnowed the 585,000 down to 962 accounts. This represents a core group of Twitter users who are connected in overlapping ways to the most influential and widely followed Antifa figures. Of these 962 accounts, 22 were found to be verified Twitter accounts of journalists, of which 15 were journalists who work regularly with national-level news outlets. I will also add some of these people regularly campaign to cause damage to career rivals. I don't want to see political, right? I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but they'll try and deplatform certain independent creators and like moderate individuals on social media who they will accuse of being fringe, and they'll smear and they'll promote lies, etc. It should be stressed that a journalist's close social media engagement with any particular group should not be seen as incriminating per se. Many journalists follow and even interact with all manner of figures online, either out of personal curiosity, professional interest, or even as a means of developing sources. In identifying this group of 15 journalists whose engagement with Antifa is especially intense, our goal was not to accuse them of bias out of hand, but rather to identify them for further study so as to determine if there was any overall correlation between the level of their online engagement with Antifa and the manner by which these journalists treated Antifa in their published journalism. Now, some of these people, I think, have been, they mentioned Jack Smith IV, but I'm pretty sure his career is over. He's been accused of impropriety with his girlfriend or whatever. I don't know much about it, but I don't think he works anymore. They do include some people who are overt activists, who have always been activists. I want to make sure that's clear. But then they do include some people who have worked with Vice and The Guardian and other outlets. So they say the correlation turned out to be quite pronounced. Of all 15 verified national-level journalists in our subset, we couldn't find a single article by any of them that was markedly critical of Antifa in any way. In all cases, their work in this area consisted primarily of downplaying Antifa while advancing their talking points, and in some cases quoting the extremists as if they were impartial experts. I can attest to this being true. I mean, I've seen it. However, he does mention Kit O'Connell. Kit O'Connell is an Occupy activist who once invited me to Austin, and I did a training on technology. He has since been extremely radicalized. You know, I had a conversation like a couple years ago, year two, and he was like, not that crazy. He has gone off the rocker, essentially sending me what I would take to be a death threat to me, saying something, I can't remember exactly what it was because he blocked me and then deleted it, but it was something about how, like, his people want to end my life, to put it simply. It wasn't like a direct, but it was veiled, right? They say he's proudly identified as a proudly anti-fascist gonzo journalist whose work often reads like an FAQ that one might find on an Antifa website. In one piece, for instance, he wrote that protesters wear masks so that they may create a sense of unity and common purpose as they protect other activists from police and fascists. He brings up, I'm not going to read through all of this and all of his justifications, but he mentions one guy who's with AJ English, formerly of AJ English. Oh wow, look at this. Okay, we'll do this. Another column for The Guardian. This one about the 2018 Occupy ICE protests in Portland. He talks about, let me go back, sorry. He says, a more prominent example is Jason Wilson, a Portland-based writer for The Guardian. One of his recent articles focused on a U.S. regional intelligence report whose author concluded that Antifa and the far-right share responsibility for, street escalation. One of Wilson's main experts in the piece was none other than Antifa handbook author Mark Bray, who predictably denounced the report's contents as ludicrous. In fact, Bray makes regular appearances in Wilson's articles. So does fellow Portland resident and eco-extremist Alexander Reed Ross, who regularly writes for Antifa publications, such as It's Going Down, Anarchist News. And this is the guy who also falsely claimed that I went to Iran to speak at a Holocaust deniers conference. So that's the level of, the credibility these people have. In fact, my understanding is he was fired from the Southern Poverty Law Center as a writer, or contributor or whatever, and they deleted all of his articles for posting that complete nonsense, and I got an apology from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So these are the people who are infiltrating and writing for these organizations, and they don't seek to inform you or better help you understand the world. They seek to manipulate you, so you bend the knee and stand behind them as they throw flaming garbage at people they don't like. Welcome to 2019. He goes on to talk a bit more about Jason Wilson, but I'm not super concerned. I don't want to, target specific individuals for their specific things they're doing, more so highlight the phenomenon of these people working for news outlets and that being allowed. He goes on to mention Christopher Mathias, a senior reporter for the Huffington Post, also applies the same cynical approach like Wilson. Mathias's byline seems to pop up whenever Antifa stages violent protest, and he always can be counted on to deliver a play-by-play that favors Antifa. In fact, Christopher Mathias, I could be wrong because it's been a while, his reporting, because I was in Portland for a couple of these events, is less credible, believe it or not, than Right Wing Watch. Jared Holt wrote an account of some event in Portland that was damn good journalism. It was impressive because Right Wing Watch is essentially like a marketing arm for a progressive political organization called like I forgot what it's called, like a Progressive Way or something. But they produce articles because it serves the nonprofit's interests, and it was actually spot on. I read through it and I'm like, yep, Jared Holt basically got it right. And it was, and a lot of people were shocked at my assessment because they were like, but this guy works for an activist organization. Sure, the Huffington Post did a worse job. It was nuts how bad their writing was. He says, unlike Wilson, Mathias actually doxes individuals whom he suspects of being right-wing extremists. His doxing sources for an article about suspected people in the U.S. included Unicorn Riot, an anarchic Antifa journalist collective, who have since gone nuts and published fake news, mind-blowingly fake news, and recently published all of the comments from my Discord server, which have damaging information such as Tim Pool saying all racists are bad, and how dare Vox entertain race realism. Oh, but they published it all, public information, and they try to smear me with it. They're nuts, and I know one of the founders. He says, the Anarchist Journalist Collective and other shady sites that exist as a sort of in-house 4chan for the Antifa movement. Mathias cited similar sources when he published identifying details of a Texas schoolteacher. Mathias's apparent modus operandi is to gather doxes of individuals whom Antifa or Antifa-friendly groups suspect. At Huffington Post then reaches out to the target's employer, asking for comment, leveraging the media outlet's name to ensure the individual is called out. Then Mathias posts the doxes in his column while investigations are ongoing. With Emily Gorsensky's First Vigil site, Mathias broadcasts detailed personal information, whose release seems designed to destroy the reputation of the accused. No matter the results of any subsequent investigation, it's unclear how this behavior differs from ordinary, everyday Antifa-style online activism. He ends by saying, there is no doubt in my mind that many of the individuals targeted by Antifa trolls and protesters do indeed harbor noxious, hateful, bigoted, and even fascistic opinions. But the intellectual dishonesty and disreputable methods being used to target these individuals is an example of the cure being as bad as the disease. Final thought on this, because I did cover it before, but it's like when you have an autoimmune disorder and the white blood cells start attacking healthy cells or just running amok. And, look, fascism is horrifying and dangerous and bad, and yes, we should oppose it at every step. We have civil rights and we have to abide by the rules on purpose, but we can defeat those, we can defeat the fascists and the evil, awful people and the racists and the bigots, but we're not going to do it by being evil, awful, like these people are. That's the important point. They're running wild and they're causing damage, but I'll leave it there. I've got one more segment coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you shortly. For those on the podcast, it's starting now.